The morning fog hung thick over Windsor Castle as Thomas Hartwell adjusted his scarlet tunic one final time. After 43 years of faithful service to the crown, today would be his last day as a Queen's Guard. His withered hands trembled slightly as he fastened the brass buttons, each one polished to mirror perfection despite the countless times they had been cleaned over the decades. Thomas had joined the Guards at 18, fresh-faced and eager to serve his country and monarch. Now, at 61, his once straight spine curved slightly under the weight of years spent standing at attention, and his dark hair had turned silver beneath his iconic bearskin hat. But his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence that had caught the attention of his superiors all those years ago. As he walked through the ancient corridors of Windsor Castle for what he knew would be the last time in uniform, memories flooded back. He remembered his first day, how intimidating the massive stone walls had seemed, how the other guards had looked like giants in their formal dress. He recalled the countless hours of training, learning not just how to march and stand guard, but the intricate protocols of royal protection, the subtle art of being invisible while remaining vigilant. The castle was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Servants hurried past carrying silver trays, their footsteps echoing off the stone floors. Other guards nodded respectfully as Thomas passed, each knowing this was his final day. Some had served alongside him for decades, sharing silent vigils through long nights and witnessing history unfold before their eyes. Thomas made his way to the guard room, where generations of protectors had prepared for duty. The room smelled of leather polish and brass cleaner, familiar scents that would forever remind him of his service. On the wall hung portraits of past commanders, their stern faces watching over those who continued the tradition they had helped establish. He opened his locker, running his fingers over the personal items he had kept there. A photograph of his late wife, Margaret, smiled back at him. She had understood the demands of his profession, the long hours, the absolute dedication required. She had never complained about the missed dinners or the holidays spent on duty. Margaret had been proud of his service, always introducing him as "my husband," the Queen's Guard at social gatherings. Behind Margaret's photograph lay something else, something he had hidden there for 4 decades. His fingers found the edge of a small envelope, yellowed with age and worn smooth from countless careful handlings. The envelope that contained the secret he had carried for so long, waiting for the right moment to fulfill a promise made to a dying man. The memory came rushing back as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. It was 1982, and Thomas had been assigned to night duty at Buckingham Palace. The IRA had been particularly active that year, and security was tighter than usual. Every shadow could hide a threat, every unexpected sound might signal danger. It had been during one of those tense nights that he first encountered James Morrison, a fellow guard who had served for nearly 30 years. James was older, more experienced, and had a reputation for being completely trustworthy. He had trained Thomas in the finer points of royal protection, teaching him how to read situations, how to anticipate problems before they developed. James had seemed different that night, more thoughtful than usual. During their brief break, he had pulled Thomas aside to a quiet corner of the palace grounds. The older guard's face was pale in the moonlight, and his hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette. "Thomas," James had said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something. Something I've carried for too long." Thomas had listened intently as James revealed a story that seemed impossible to believe. It involved a young woman who had worked in the palace during the late 1970s, someone who had been close to the royal family but whose presence had been kept strictly confidential. She had been beautiful, intelligent, and had captured the attention of someone very important. Her name was Elena Martinez, James had continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. She was Spanish, came here to work as a translator. But she was more than that, Thomas. Much more. According to James, Elena had been involved in a brief but intense relationship with Prince Charles, years before he met Diana Spencer. It had been during a difficult period in the prince's life when he was struggling with the pressures of his position and the expectations placed upon him. Elena had been different from the aristocratic women he usually encountered. She was independent, intellectual, and unimpressed by his title. They fell in love, James had whispered. Real love, Thomas. Not the kind arranged by courtiers or driven by duty. She made him laugh, made him forget about his responsibilities for a while. But it couldn't last. The relationship had been discovered by palace officials, who immediately recognized the impossibility of the situation. Elena was not only a commoner but a foreigner, and her presence represented a potential scandal that could damage the monarchy. She had been quietly removed from her position and asked to leave England. But, before she left, Elena had discovered she was pregnant. Thomas had felt his blood run cold at this revelation. James continued his story, explaining how Elena had tried to contact Prince Charles, but her messages had been intercepted by palace security. Desperate and alone, she had reached out to the only person she trusted within the palace walls, James Morrison. "She gave me this letter," James had said, pulling out the envelope that now rested in Thomas's locker. "She begged me to deliver it to Charles, but I was just a guard. I couldn't approach the prince directly, and I was terrified of what would happen if I tried to go through official channels." Elena had returned to Spain, where she had given birth to a son. She had named him Miguel, and she had raised him alone, never telling anyone about his true parentage. But she had never stopped hoping that someday the letter would reach Prince Charles. "She died 5 years ago," James had said, his voice breaking. "Breast cancer. But before she died, she wrote me another letter. She said if anything happened to her, I should find a way to get the original message to Prince Charles. She said their son deserved to know the truth about his father." James had explained that he had tried several times to find the right opportunity to deliver the letter, but the years had passed, and he had never found the courage. Now, facing his own mortality, he had been diagnosed with heart disease. He was passing the responsibility to Thomas. "Promise me," James had pleaded. "Promise me you'll find a way to get this letter to where it belongs. Elena's son is a grown man now, and he has children of his own. They deserve to know their heritage." Thomas had taken the letter with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the secret it contained. He had promised James that he would find a way to fulfill Elena's dying wish. James Morrison had suffered a fatal heart attack just 2 weeks later. For 4 decades, Thomas had carried that letter, waiting for the right moment. He had served through the reigns of Queen Elizabeth II and watched as Prince Charles became King Charles III. He had witnessed the prince's marriage to Diana, their divorce, and his eventual marriage to Camilla. Through all of it, the letter had remained hidden in his locker, a constant weight on his conscience. Several times over the years, Thomas had almost acted. He had researched Elena Martinez and discovered that she had indeed died as James had said. He had even managed to locate some information about her son, Miguel, who had become a successful architect in Madrid. Miguel had a family of his own and appeared to know nothing about his potential royal connection. But each time Thomas had prepared to reveal the secret, something had held him back. The fear of the consequences, the uncertainty about whether the letter was genuine, and the potential damage it could cause to the monarchy had kept him silent. Now, on his final day of service, Thomas knew he could wait no longer. King Charles III was in his 70s, and if the letter contained information he deserved to know, time was running short. More importantly, Miguel Martinez and his children had a right to understand their possible heritage. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted Thomas's memories. He quickly closed his locker and turned to see Captain Richards, his commanding officer, approaching with a younger guard Thomas didn't recognize. "Hartwell," Captain Richards said formally, but his eyes showed warmth. "I'd like you to meet Guard Williams. He'll be taking over your post." Thomas shook hands with the young man, seeing himself as he had been 43 years ago, nervous, eager, and completely unaware of the secrets and responsibilities that lay ahead. "It's an honor, sir," Williams said respectfully. "I've heard about your service. They say you're one of the finest guards who ever served." Thomas felt a flush of pride, but also a pang of guilt. Had he truly served with honor if he had kept such an important secret for so long? He nodded politely and began to show Williams around the post, explaining the routines and procedures that had become second nature over the decades. As the morning progressed, Thomas found himself looking for Prince William, who was scheduled to visit Windsor Castle that day. Since becoming the Prince of Wales, William had been taking on more responsibilities, and his presence at the castle was becoming more frequent. Thomas had always respected the younger prince, seeing in him a dedication to duty that reminded him of Queen Elizabeth II. If Thomas was going to act on the secret he had carried for so long, Prince William might be the right person to approach. As the future king, he would need to know about any potential complications to the royal lineage. More importantly, William had shown himself to be compassionate and understanding, qualities that would be essential in handling such a delicate situation. The morning duties passed slowly, each familiar routine taking on special significance as Thomas performed them for the final time. He inspected the guard posts, reviewed the security protocols, and briefed the incoming shift on the day's events. Everything was exactly as it had been for decades, yet everything felt different knowing he would never do these things again. At midday, word came that Prince William had arrived at the castle. Thomas felt his heart rate increase as he considered his options. He could simply finish his shift, retire quietly, and take the secret with him. No one would ever know, and the royal family would be protected from a potentially embarrassing revelation. But, then, he thought of Elena Martinez, dying alone in Spain with her secret intact. He thought of Miguel Martinez, living his life without knowing who his father might be. He thought of James Morrison, who had trusted him with this responsibility 40 years ago. Thomas made his decision. He requested a private audience with Captain Richards, knowing it would be unusual but hoping his years of exemplary service would grant him this final favor. Richards agreed, curious about what his most trusted guard might need on his last day. In the privacy of the captain's office, Thomas explained his situation carefully. He told Richards about the letter, about James Morrison's dying request, and about the burden he had carried for 4 decades. He showed Richards the envelope, pointing out Elena Martinez's name written in fading ink. Captain Richards listened with growing amazement and concern. As a career military man, he understood the importance of duty and the difficulty of Thomas's position. He also understood the potential implications of the letter's contents. "Thomas," Richards said finally, "this is far beyond anything I can handle alone. If what you're suggesting is true, this needs to go to the very top of the palace hierarchy." "I know, sir," Thomas replied. "But I also know I can't take this secret to my grave. James Morrison trusted me, and I need to honor that trust." Richards considered the situation carefully. He had known Thomas for over 20 years and had never encountered a more honorable or trustworthy individual. If Thomas believed this letter was genuine and important, then it deserved serious consideration. "I think," Richards said slowly, "that we need to involve Prince William directly. If anyone can handle this situation with the discretion and wisdom it requires, it's him." Thomas felt relief wash over him. After 40 years of carrying this burden alone, someone else finally knew the truth. Whether the letter would reach its intended recipient remained to be seen, but at least he had taken the first step toward fulfilling his promise to James Morrison. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Richards made discreet inquiries and arranged for a private meeting with Prince William later that day. Thomas spent the time rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain 4 decades of silence, and how he would present the letter that had shaped his entire career. As the sun began to set over Windsor Castle, Thomas prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his life. The letter that Elena Martinez had written so many years ago was finally about to be delivered, and, with it, a secret that could change everything. In just a few hours, Thomas would sit across from the future King of England and reveal a story of love, loss, and hidden royal connections that had remained buried for nearly half a century. Whatever happened next, he would finally be free of the burden he had carried for so long. The weight of 40 years was about to be lifted from his shoulders, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to set in motion events that would have consequences far beyond anything he could imagine. As he prepared for his final duty as a Queen's Guard, Thomas Hartwell wondered if he was about to serve his country in the most important way possible, or if he was about to unleash a scandal that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. The private sitting room in Windsor Castle had witnessed countless important conversations throughout its centuries of existence, but few as potentially significant as the one about to take place. Thomas Hartwell sat in an uncomfortable wooden chair, his dress uniform pristine despite the emotional weight of the moment. Across from him, Prince William settled into a leather armchair, his expression curious but patient. Captain Richards had briefed the prince about the general nature of the meeting, explaining only that Guard Hartwell had information of historical importance that required royal attention. William, known for his approachable manner and genuine interest in those who served the crown, had agreed to the unusual request without hesitation. "Guard Hartwell," Prince William began, his voice warm but formal, "Captain Richards tells me you have served with exceptional distinction for over 4 decades. That kind of dedication deserves recognition and respect." Thomas felt his throat tighten. After all these years of military discipline, he found himself unexpectedly emotional. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve the crown. And, now, on your final day, you have something important to share with me?" William leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes showing genuine interest. Thomas reached into his uniform pocket and carefully withdrew the aged envelope. His hands, which had remained steady through countless hours of guard duty, now trembled slightly as he held the letter that had defined his career. "Your Royal Highness, what I'm about to share with you is a story that began before your birth, involves your father, and has been a closely guarded secret for 40 years. Thomas paused, gathering his courage. "I need you to understand that I've struggled with this decision for decades, but I believe it's finally time for the truth to be known." William's expression grew more serious. As someone who had grown up in the public eye, he understood the weight that family secrets could carry. "Please, go on." Thomas began his story carefully, starting with his early days as a guard and his relationship with James Morrison. He explained how Morrison had been a mentor and friend, someone who had taught him the true meaning of service to the crown. William listened intently, occasionally nodding to show he was following the narrative. "In 1982, Thomas continued, James shared something with me that he had kept secret for several years. It concerned a young woman named Elena Martinez, who had worked briefly in the palace as a translator." As Thomas described Elena's relationship with Prince Charles, William's expression remained carefully neutral, though his attention seemed to sharpen. He had heard rumors and stories about his father's life before marriage, but nothing as specific as what Thomas was revealing. "According to James, your father and Elena developed a genuine relationship during a difficult period in his life. She was different from the women he typically encountered, independent, intelligent, and unimpressed by royal protocol." Thomas watched William's face for any reaction, but the prince maintained his composure. "The relationship was discovered by palace officials, who immediately recognized its impossibility. Elena was quietly removed from her position and asked to leave England." Thomas's voice grew heavier. "But, before she left, she discovered she was pregnant." William's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his diplomatic facade. "Pregnant?" "Yes, Your Royal Highness. She gave birth to a son in Spain, a boy she named Miguel Martinez. James Morrison was the only person in the palace she trusted, and, before leaving England, she gave him this letter." Thomas held up the envelope. "She begged him to deliver it to your father, but James was afraid of the consequences. He was just a guard, with no direct access to Prince Charles." Thomas explained how James had carried the secret for years, how Elena had died of cancer, and how, on his deathbed, James had passed the responsibility to Thomas. Throughout the explanation, William remained silent, processing the implications of what he was hearing. "For 40 years, I've carried this letter," Thomas said. "I've watched your father become king, I've seen the family grow and change, and I've wondered whether I was protecting the crown by keeping this secret or failing in my duty by not revealing it." William was quiet for a long moment, staring at the envelope in Thomas's hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and thoughtful. "This is unexpected. If what you're telling me is true, it means I may have a half-brother I've never known about." "Yes, Your Royal Highness. Miguel Martinez is now in his early 40s. He's an architect living in Madrid, married with 2 children of his own. As far as I know, he has no idea about his possible connection to the royal family." William stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the castle grounds where Thomas had spent so many years of his life. The weight of the revelation was clearly affecting him, though he maintained his royal composure. "Have you ever attempted to verify this story? To investigate Elena Martinez or her son?" William asked, not turning from the window. I've done some research over the years, discreetly. Elena Martinez did exist. She worked at the palace in the late 1970s as a translator. She died in 2017 in Madrid, as James said she would. Her son Miguel is real, and the timeline fits with what James told me. Thomas paused. But I've never attempted direct contact, and I've never opened the letter. I felt it wasn't my place to read correspondence intended for your father. William returned to his chair, his expression showing the complex emotions he was processing. As someone who valued family deeply and had experienced his own share of family complications, he understood the significance of what Thomas was revealing. Tell me about James Morrison. What kind of man was he? Can you vouch for his character and honesty? Thomas's face softened as he remembered his old mentor. James was the finest man I ever served with, Your Royal Highness. He was honest to a fault, completely dedicated to the crown, and incapable of deception. If he said Elena Martinez gave him this letter, then that's exactly what happened. And yet he kept it secret for years. He was terrified, sir. A working-class man from Yorkshire who found himself holding information that could affect the royal succession. He didn't know what to do with it, and by the time he realized he needed to act, he was dying. Thomas's voice carried the weight of understanding. He passed that fear and responsibility to me, and I've lived with it ever since. William considered this for several minutes, the silence in the room broken only by the distant sounds of castle activity. Finally, he looked directly at Thomas. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Why are you coming forward now? Why not take this secret to your grave? Thomas had anticipated this question and had prepared his answer carefully. Several reasons, Your Royal Highness. First, I made a promise to a dying man, and, after 40 years, I need to honor that promise. Second, if Miguel Martinez is indeed your father's son, he has children who deserve to know their heritage. Third, as king, your father should be aware of any potential complications to the royal lineage. And, personally? What do you hope to gain from this? Nothing, sir. I'm retiring today. I have no pension concerns, no career ambitions, nothing to gain and everything to lose. I simply want to fulfill my duty as I understand it. Thomas's voice was steady and sincere. I've served the crown faithfully for 43 years. This is my final act of service. William studied Thomas's face, seeing the sincerity in his weathered features. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family, now potentially causing them significant complications out of a sense of duty and honor. If I take this letter, what do you expect me to do with it? I don't presume to advise your Royal Highness on such matters. That's far beyond my position or knowledge. I simply felt it was my duty to ensure the letter reached someone who could make informed decisions about its contents. William reached out and accepted the envelope from Thomas's trembling hands. The paper felt fragile, and he could see Elena Martinez's name written in fading ink across the front. Below her name, in different handwriting, were the words "For His Royal Highness Prince Charles" in English. Has anyone else seen this letter or heard this story? Captain Richards knows what I've told you today, but no one else. James Morrison and I were the only ones who knew the full story, and James has been dead for 40 years. William turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of decision. Should he open it now, in Thomas's presence? Should he take it to his father immediately? Should he investigate further before taking any action? Guard Hartwell, I want you to understand something. If this letter contains what you believe it contains, it could have significant implications for my family and for the monarchy as an institution. Are you prepared for those consequences? Thomas met William's gaze steadily. Your Royal Highness, I've been preparing for those consequences for 40 years. Whatever happens next is in God's hands and yours. William made his decision. He carefully opened the envelope, extracting several pages of handwritten text in Spanish, along with what appeared to be a photograph. His Spanish was limited, but he could make out enough to understand that this was indeed a deeply personal letter. I'll need to have this translated properly, William said, studying the pages. But, from what I can understand, this does appear to be what you've described, a letter from Elena Martinez to my father, discussing their relationship and her pregnancy. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, holding a baby. On the back, someone had written Elena and Miguel, 1982 in Spanish. William looked up at Thomas. This is significant. If genuine, it confirms your story about Elena Martinez and provides evidence of her son's existence. There's something else, Your Royal Highness. Thomas reached into another pocket and withdrew a small piece of paper. Before James died, he gave me Elena's address in Madrid. He said if anything happened to him, I should try to verify her story. I never contacted her directly, but I used the address to research her background. William accepted the paper, noting the careful handwriting that provided Elena Martinez's full name, address, and even her occupation is listed in Spanish records. Someone had been very thorough in documenting this information. This level of detail suggests that James Morrison was very serious about this matter, William observed. Yes, sir. James was meticulous about everything. If he kept this information, it was because he believed it was important and true. William stood up again, this time pacing slightly as he processed everything he had learned. The implications were staggering. If Elena Martinez's claims were true, his father had a son in Spain who knew nothing about his royal heritage. That man had children who were technically members of the royal bloodline, however, distant. Guard Hartwell, I need you to understand that this information must remain absolutely confidential while I determine how to proceed. Can you give me your word that you will not discuss this with anyone else? You have my word, Your Royal Highness. As I said, after 40 years of silence, I'm not about to start talking now. William returned to his chair, still holding the letter and photograph. I'm going to need some time to consider this carefully. I'll need to have the letter properly translated, possibly authenticated, and I'll need to decide how to approach my father with this information. I understand completely, sir. I also want you to know that I appreciate your courage in coming forward. This couldn't have been an easy decision, and I respect your dedication to honoring your promise to James Morrison. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. After 4 decades of carrying this secret alone, someone else now shared the responsibility. Whether William decided to investigate further or file the letter away, Thomas had fulfilled his obligation to James Morrison and Elena Martinez. Is there anything else you can tell me about this situation? Any other details that James Morrison shared with you? Thomas considered carefully. James did mention that Elena tried several times to contact your father after she left England. Her letters were apparently intercepted by palace security and never delivered. She eventually gave up trying, but she never stopped hoping that someday the truth would come out. And her son Miguel? What do you know about him? He's apparently successful in his career, married to a woman named Carmen, with 2 teenage children. He seems to have had a normal, happy life in Madrid. Elena raised him as a single mother but never told him who his father might be. William absorbed this information, trying to imagine how he might feel if he suddenly discovered he had royal heritage. The implications for Miguel Martinez and his family would be enormous. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said quietly, there's one more thing I feel I should mention. Elena Martinez died of breast cancer in 2017. According to the records I could find, she was in considerable financial difficulty during her final illness. If she had been able to prove her connection to the royal family, it might have made a significant difference in her circumstances. William's expression grew somber. The idea that his potential half-brother's mother had died in poverty while the royal family remained unaware of her existence was deeply troubling. That makes this situation even more complex, William said. If Miguel Martinez is indeed my father's son, then we failed Elena Martinez when she needed help the most. The room fell silent as both men contemplated the implications of what had been revealed. Thomas had fulfilled his 40-year obligation, but he had also potentially opened a door that could never be closed again. Guard Hartwell, I want to thank you for your service to the crown, and for your courage in sharing this information with me. Whatever I decide to do with this letter, you can be assured that I'll handle it with the care and discretion it deserves. Thomas stood up, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness. It has been an honor to serve, and an honor to finally complete this final duty." As Thomas prepared to leave, William had one final question. "In your opinion, what do you think Elena Martinez would have wanted? If she were alive today, what would she hope for?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "Based on what James told me, I think she would have wanted Miguel to know the truth about his heritage. Not for money or recognition, but because she believed he deserved to understand who he really was. She loved your father, and I think she would have wanted him to know about his son." William nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I suspected you'd say." As Thomas left the private sitting room, he felt the weight of 4 decades lifting from his shoulders. He had honored his promise to James Morrison, served his final duty to the crown, and placed a potentially life-changing secret in capable hands. Behind him, Prince William sat alone with Elena Martinez's letter, a photograph of a woman and child he had never known existed, and the knowledge that his family tree had just become significantly more complicated. The future King of England now faced one of the most delicate decisions of his life, whether to reveal a 40-year-old secret that could change everything, or to let sleeping secrets lie undisturbed forever. But Thomas Hartwell was finally free. His vigil was over. 3 days had passed since Thomas Hartwell's revelation, and Prince William had spent every quiet moment since then, wrestling with the implications of Elena Martinez's letter. The translation had been completed by a trusted palace linguist who had been told only that it was a historical document requiring discretion. The contents had confirmed Thomas's account in devastating detail. Elena's letter was both a love declaration and a desperate plea. Written in elegant Spanish, it described her relationship with Prince Charles with touching honesty. She wrote of their conversations about art and philosophy, their shared love of classical music, and the way he had seemed to find peace in her company during a turbulent period of his life. But, more importantly, she wrote about their son. "My dearest Carlos," the letter began, using the Spanish version of Charles's name, "I write this letter knowing it may never reach you, but hoping that somehow, someday, you will understand what we shared and what came from our love." The letter went on to describe Miguel's birth, his first words, his resemblance to his father. Elena had enclosed a lock of the baby's hair and several photographs showing Miguel as he grew from infant to toddler. Most poignantly, she had written about the child's questions about his father and her struggle to answer them honestly without revealing the impossible truth. "He has your eyes, Carlos, and your serious way of considering the world. He loves books and music, just as you do. Sometimes I catch him staring out the window with an expression so much like yours that my heart breaks with missing you." Elena had also included details that only someone truly close to Prince Charles would have known: his habit of humming while reading, his preference for Earl Grey tea, a small scar on his hand from a childhood accident. These intimate details gave the letter an authenticity that would be impossible to fake. But the most difficult part of the letter was Elena's description of her attempts to contact Charles after leaving England. She had written multiple letters through official channels, all of which had been returned unopened or simply disappeared. She had tried calling, only to be told that no such person was available. Eventually, she had understood that the palace had erected an impenetrable barrier between them. "I do not write this letter seeking anything for myself," Elena had continued. "I have made my peace with our impossible situation. But I write for our son, who deserves to know where he comes from. If you ever learn of his existence, please know that he is good and kind and worthy of your love, even if circumstances make that love impossible to express." The letter was dated 6 months after Miguel's birth, and Elena had added a postscript written years later: "I am updating this letter in 1990, as Miguel is now 8 years old. He still asks about his father sometimes, and I still don't know what to tell him. I pray that someday, you will find a way to be part of his life, even if only he knows the truth about who you are." William had read the letter countless times, each reading making the situation feel more real and more complicated. The woman who had written these words was clearly intelligent, loving, and deeply committed to her son's well-being. She wasn't asking for money or recognition, she was simply asking for acknowledgement of a relationship that had produced a child. The photographs were equally compelling. They showed Miguel at various ages, and the resemblance to Prince Charles was unmistakable. The same nose, the same serious expression, the same way of holding his head slightly tilted when concentrating. In later photos, Miguel looked remarkably similar to how William himself had looked as a child. William had spent hours researching Elena Martinez through private channels, confirming the details Thomas Hartwell had provided. She had indeed worked as a translator at the palace, had left England abruptly in early 1981, and had given birth to Miguel later that year. She had never married, had worked as a language teacher in Madrid, and had died of cancer in 2017, exactly as James Morrison had predicted decades earlier. Most significantly, William had arranged for discreet inquiries about Miguel Martinez himself. The man was indeed a successful architect, married with 2 teenage children, and appeared to have no knowledge of his possible royal connections. He lived a normal middle-class life in Madrid, was involved in local community activities, and, by all accounts, was a devoted husband and father. The weight of this knowledge was becoming unbearable. William understood that he was possibly the only person in the world who knew that the future King of England had a son living in Spain, and that this son had children who carried royal blood without knowing it. But William also understood the potential consequences of revelation. The scandal could be enormous, potentially damaging the monarchy at a time when it was working to maintain public support. The legitimacy questions alone would provide ammunition for Republican movements across the Commonwealth. The media attention would be overwhelming for Miguel Martinez and his family, who had done nothing to deserve such intrusion. On the other hand, Miguel Martinez had a right to know his heritage. His children had a right to understand their grandfather was the King of England. And Prince Charles himself deserved to know that he had a son and grandchildren he had never met. William made a decision that surprised even himself. He would approach his father directly. The conversation with King Charles III took place in the king's private study at Clarence House. William had requested an urgent private meeting, telling his father only that it concerned a historical matter of family importance. Charles, busy with his royal duties and various charitable obligations, had initially tried to postpone, but something in William's tone had convinced him to make time. "You seem unusually serious, William," Charles observed as his son entered the study. "Is everything all right with Catherine and the children?" "Everyone is fine, Papa. But I need to discuss something with you that concerns our family's history." William sat down across from his father, noting how the years of kingship had aged him. "What I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock." Charles set aside the papers he had been reviewing, giving William his full attention. "You have my complete focus." William began carefully, explaining about Thomas Hartwell's long service and his reputation for absolute integrity. He described the guard's final day confession and the story of James Morrison's 40-year secret. "James Morrison," Charles mused. "I remember him vaguely. A tall man, very professional. He was part of the security detail during the early 80s, wasn't he?" "Yes, Papa." And, according to his account, he was approached by a young woman named Elena Martinez, who had worked at the palace as a translator. William watched his father's face carefully as he mentioned the name. Charles's expression didn't change immediately, but William saw a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Elena Martinez," Charles repeated slowly. "That name, it sounds familiar." "She worked at the palace from 1978 to early 1981. She was Spanish, intelligent, and, according to James Morrison's account, she had a relationship with you during that period." Charles was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he searched his memory. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and uncertain. "Elena. Yes, I remember Elena. She was different from other people at court. We had several conversations about literature and history. She had fascinating insights." "Papa," William said gently, "according to the information I've received, your relationship with Elena was more than just conversations." Charles looked up sharply, meeting his son's eyes. "What exactly are you saying, William?" William withdrew Elena's letter from his briefcase, along with the photographs. "Elena Martinez wrote you this letter in 1982. She claimed that you had a romantic relationship during 1980 and early 1981, and that she became pregnant." she left England and gave birth to a son named Miguel. Charles stared at the letter and photographs as if they were objects from another planet. His hands shook slightly as he reached for Elena's picture, studying her face intently. "My God," he whispered. "Elena. I remember her so clearly now. She was beautiful, but more than that, she made me feel like myself, not like a prince. We would talk for hours about everything except my royal duties." "Do you remember having a romantic relationship with her?" Charles was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with memory and emotion. When he finally answered, his voice was barely audible. Yes, we did. It was brief, but it was real. I cared for her deeply, more deeply than I should have allowed myself to." "What happened? Why did she leave?" "I don't remember exactly. One day she was there, and the next day I was told she had returned to Spain for family reasons. I tried to ask about her, but I was told it was a private matter and I shouldn't inquire further." Charles looked up at William with growing realization. "You think they made her leave?" "It seems likely, Papa. A romantic relationship between you and a foreign commoner would have been considered problematic by palace officials, especially during that period." Charles examined the photographs of Miguel, and William watched as recognition dawned in his father's eyes. He looks like you did at that age. And, like I did. The resemblance is remarkable. According to the research I've conducted, Miguel Martinez is now 43 years old. He's married, has 2 teenage children, and works as an architect in Madrid. As far as I can determine, he knows nothing about his possible connection to you." Charles set down the photographs and leaned back in his chair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. If this is true, it means I have a son I've never known about, and grandchildren I've never met. Elena tried to contact you after she left England, but her letters were apparently intercepted. She eventually gave up, but she never stopped hoping that someday you would know about Miguel. And she's dead now? She died of cancer in 2017. According to Gard Hartwell, she was in financial difficulty during her final illness. Charles closed his eyes, and William could see the pain on his face. "I failed her. If what you're telling me is true, I failed her completely. She needed help, and I never even knew she existed." "You couldn't have known, Papa. The palace system prevented any communication from reaching you." "But I should have looked for her. I should have asked more questions when she disappeared. I cared for her, and I let palace officials convince me to forget about her." William allowed his father a few moments to process the emotional impact of the revelation. "Papa, the question now is what we do with this information. Miguel Martinez and his family have a right to know their heritage, but revelation would also create enormous complications for the monarchy." Charles opened Elena's letter and began reading, his Spanish still adequate after years of royal duties. As he read, his expression grew increasingly emotional. "She writes about Miguel's personality, his interests, his resemblance to me. She says he loves books and classical music. The details in the letter suggest genuine intimacy with you. She mentions things about your habits and preferences that only someone very close would know." Charles nodded, still reading. "These details are accurate. The way she describes our conversations, the things she remembers about me, this couldn't be fabricated. I had the letter authenticated by experts. The paper, ink, and handwriting all match the time period Elena claims. Everything suggests this is genuine." Charles finished reading and set the letter down carefully. "William, if this is true, and everything you've shown me suggests it is, then I have a moral obligation to Miguel. He has a right to know who his father is. But, Papa, you also have obligations to the crown and to the people of Britain. The revelation of a secret son could cause a significant scandal. Since when do we put institutional concerns above basic human decency?" Charles asked, his voice growing stronger. "If Miguel Martinez is my son, then he deserves to know the truth, regardless of the consequences to the monarchy." William felt proud of his father's response, but also concerned about the practical implications. How would you propose we approach this? We can't simply appear at his door in Madrid and announce that his father is the King of England. Charles considered this carefully. We need to investigate further, verify the facts as completely as possible, and then find a discreet way to make contact. If Miguel is indeed my son, I want to meet him and his family. And if the story becomes public? Then, we'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't allow fear of scandal to prevent me from acknowledging my own child. William felt both admiration and apprehension about his father's decision. I think we need to involve very trusted advisors in this process. We'll need discreet investigation, careful planning, and absolute confidentiality. Agreed. But, William, I want you to understand something. If Miguel Martinez is my son, then you have a half-brother you've never met. How do you feel about that? William had been asking himself the same question for days. Honestly, Papa, I'm curious about him. From what I've learned, he seems like a good man with a loving family. If he's my brother, I'd like to know him. Charles smiled for the first time since the conversation began. That means everything to me, William. Your support in this matter is crucial. You have it, Papa. Whatever we decide to do, we'll do it together. Charles looked again at the photographs of Miguel, studying them with the eyes of a father seeing his child for the first time. Elena raised him alone for over 40 years. She protected him from the complications of royal life, but she also deprived him of knowing his heritage. I don't know whether to be grateful to her or angry with her. I think she did what she thought was best for Miguel under impossible circumstances. Perhaps. But now those circumstances have changed, and it's time for the truth to come out. Charles made his decision with the same authority he brought to his royal duties. I want a full investigation conducted discreetly. I want to know everything about Miguel Martinez, his life, his family, his character. If the investigation confirms what we suspect, then I want to meet him. And his family? His wife and children too, eventually. If they're willing, I want them to know they have a place in our family, regardless of how complicated that might be. William felt the weight of what they were contemplating. The revelation of Miguel Martinez's existence would change everything, for Miguel and his family, for the royal family, and, potentially for the monarchy itself. But, looking at his father's determined expression, William understood that they had passed the point of no return. Elena Martinez's 40-year-old letter had finally reached its destination, and the consequences were about to unfold in ways no one could predict. The secret that Thomas Hartwell had carried through 4 decades of faithful service was about to become a reality that would reshape the British royal family forever. Miguel Martinez stood at the window of his architect's office in Madrid, watching the morning traffic navigate the busy street below. At 43, he was a successful man by any measure. His architectural firm had designed several prominent buildings throughout Spain, his marriage to Carmen was strong after 18 years, and his 2 teenagers, Isabella and Carlos, were thriving in their studies. Yet lately, he had been feeling restless, as if something important was missing from his life. It had been 3 months since his mother Elena's personal effects had been finally sorted through after her death. Among her belongings, Carmen had discovered several boxes of documents and photographs that Elena had never shared with her family. Most were unremarkable, old work documents, letters from relatives, financial records, but some had raised questions that Miguel couldn't shake. There had been photographs of Elena from her early 20s, taken in what appeared to be elegant, formal settings. She looked radiant and happy in ways Miguel had rarely seen during his childhood. When he had asked elderly relatives about this period of his mother's life, they had been oddly evasive, mentioning only that Elena had worked abroad for a while before Miguel's birth. More puzzling were the language certificates and work references in English, documenting Elena's time as a translator in London from 1978 to 1981. Miguel had known his mother was fluent in English, but she had never mentioned working in England. When he had asked her about it years earlier, she had dismissed it as just a job and changed the subject. But the most mysterious discovery had been a small collection of newspaper clippings from British publications, all from the early 1980s. They were articles about the royal family, particularly Prince Charles. Miguel couldn't understand why his mother would have saved such seemingly random clippings, but they had been carefully preserved in a special folder along with what appeared to be official palace correspondence. Miguel had tried to put these questions aside and focus on his work, but the mystery nagged at him. Elena had been a private woman, but the level of secrecy surrounding her time in London seemed unusual even for her. His contemplation was interrupted by his secretary's voice over the intercom. "Senor Martinez, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's from the British Embassy and that it's regarding a historical research project." Miguel frowned. The British Embassy? He couldn't imagine what historical research might involve him. Did he give his name? Mr. David Richardson. He says it concerns your mother's work as a translator in the 1980s. Miguel felt his pulse quicken. After months of wondering about his mother's mysterious past, someone from the British government was asking questions about the same period. "Send him in, please." David Richardson was a distinguished man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed and carrying himself with the bearing of a career diplomat. But something about his manner suggested this wasn't a routine embassy visit. "Senor Martinez, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I understand this must seem unusual." Richardson's Spanish was perfect, but his accent betrayed his British origins. "Please, sit down. My secretary mentioned you're researching my mother's work as a translator. I have to admit, I'm curious about this myself. My mother never talked much about her time in London." Richardson settled into the chair across from Miguel's desk, studying him with interest that seemed to go beyond professional courtesy. "Yes, we're conducting research into the various translators and interpreters who worked with the government during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Your mother Elena Martinez appears in our records." "What kind of records?" Miguel asked, leaning forward. "Employment records, mostly. She worked for various government departments, including some assignments at Buckingham Palace." Richardson paused, watching Miguel's reaction. "We're particularly interested in her work at the palace because those records are somewhat incomplete." Miguel felt a chill of recognition. The palace correspondence he had found among his mother's belongings suddenly took on new significance. "Mr. Richardson, can I be direct with you? I recently found some of my mother's personal papers, including what appeared to be official correspondence from the palace. I got the impression her work there was more significant than she ever let on." Richardson's expression grew more serious. "Senor Martinez, I need to ask you something in confidence. In your research into your mother's papers, did you find anything that seemed personal? Any correspondence that wasn't strictly professional?" Miguel studied Richardson's face, sensing there was much more to this conversation than historical research. "Why are you really here, Mr. Richardson? This isn't just about employment records, is it?" Richardson was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his options. When he spoke again, his tone was more direct. "Senor Martinez, I work for a very discreet department that handles sensitive historical matters. We've recently received information suggesting that your mother's relationship with certain members of the royal family may have been more significant than official records indicate." "Relationship with the royal family?" Miguel felt his world shift slightly. "What kind of relationship?" "That's what we're trying to determine. We have reason to believe that your mother may have had personal contact with Prince Charles during her time at the palace. The nature of that contact is what we're investigating." Miguel sat back in his chair, processing this information. The newspaper clippings about Prince Charles, the secrecy surrounding his mother's time in London, her reluctance to discuss that period of her life, suddenly, it all began to form a pattern. "Mr. Richardson, are you suggesting my mother had some kind of romantic relationship with Prince Charles?" Richardson's expression didn't change, but Miguel saw confirmation in his eyes. "We're not making any claims at this point. We're simply investigating possibilities based on newly discovered information." "What kind of newly discovered information?" Richardson reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder. "Senor Martinez, before I show you this, I need you to understand that what we're discussing must remain completely confidential. The implications could be significant for everyone involved. Miguel nodded, though he felt his heart racing. I understand. Richardson opened the folder and withdrew a photograph, one of the pictures Elena had included with her letter to Prince Charles over 40 years ago. It showed Miguel as a toddler, sitting on his mother's lap. On the back, someone had written Elena and Miguel, 1982, in Elena's familiar handwriting. Miguel stared at the photograph, which he had never seen before. Where did you get this? It was recently provided to us by someone who had kept it for many years. Along with this letter. Richardson produced Elena's 40-year-old letter, still in its original envelope. Miguel recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. The letter was addressed to His Royal Highness Prince Charles in English, but the content was in Spanish. May I read it? Of course. But, I should warn you, the contents are quite personal. Miguel read his mother's letter with growing amazement and emotion. Elena's description of her relationship with Prince Charles, her account of their time together, and, most significantly, her claim that Miguel was Charles's son, it all seemed impossible and, yet explained so much about his mother's secretive past. When he finished reading, Miguel looked up at Richardson with eyes filled with questions. Could this possibly be true? We believe the letter is genuine. The paper, ink, and handwriting all match the time period, and the personal details about Prince Charles that your mother includes are accurate. More significantly, there are physical resemblances that suggest the possibility. Richardson produced another photograph, this one showing Prince Charles at a similar age to Miguel's current age. The resemblance was striking, the same nose, the same serious expression, the same way of holding the head. My God, Miguel whispered. I do look like him. The resemblance is quite remarkable. But, physical resemblance alone isn't proof. We would need additional verification to confirm the relationship your mother claimed. Miguel's mind was reeling. The possibility that his father was the King of England seemed absurd, yet the evidence Richardson was presenting was compelling. If this is true, why has no one contacted me before now? According to our information, your mother tried to contact Prince Charles multiple times after she returned to Spain, but her letters were intercepted by palace security. The relationship was considered impossible, and all evidence of it was suppressed. Then, how did you discover this letter? Richardson explained about Thomas Hartwell's 40-year secret, though he left out many of the details to protect the guard's identity. The person who kept this letter finally felt it was his duty to reveal its existence. That led to our current investigation. Miguel read the letter again, paying particular attention to Elena's description of her feelings for Prince Charles and her hopes for Miguel's future. She loved him, didn't she? This isn't just about pregnancy, she really loved him. That's certainly the impression the letter conveys. And, if the timeline is accurate, their relationship would have occurred during a period when Prince Charles was under enormous pressure regarding his future marriage. Your mother may have represented an escape from those pressures. But, it couldn't last. No, relationships between members of the royal family and foreign commoners simply weren't acceptable at that time. Your mother would have understood that eventually. Miguel set down the letter and looked directly at Richardson. Mr. Richardson, assuming for a moment that this is all true, what happens now? Why are you telling me this? Richardson had been waiting for this question. Señor Martinez, the current King Charles III has been informed about the existence of this letter and your possible relationship to him. He has expressed a strong desire to meet you, if you're willing. Miguel felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The king wants to meet me? He's very interested in determining whether you are indeed his son. If you are, he wants to acknowledge you and welcome you into his family. And, if this becomes public knowledge? There would certainly be media attention and public interest. But, the king is prepared to deal with those consequences. His primary concern is doing right by you and your family. Miguel stood up and walked to his window again, trying to process everything he had learned. The idea that his father might be the King of England was overwhelming, but it also answered so many questions about his childhood, his mother's secretiveness, and the sense he had always had that something important was missing from his life. what about my family? My wife and children? If the relationship is confirmed, they would also be welcomed as members of the extended royal family. Your children would be the king's grandchildren. Miguel thought about Isabella and Carlos, now 16 and 14 respectively. How would they react to learning their grandfather was the King of England? How would Carmen handle the enormous changes such a revelation would bring to their quiet life in Madrid? Mr. Richardson, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe this letter is genuine? Do you believe Prince Charles is my father? Richardson considered his answer carefully. Based on all the evidence I've reviewed, the letter, the photographs, the timeline, the physical resemblances, and the historical records, I believe there's a very strong possibility that the relationship your mother described actually occurred. Whether that makes Prince Charles your biological father can only be determined through additional investigation. What kind of additional investigation? DNA testing would provide definitive proof. If you're willing, we could arrange for discrete testing that would settle the question once and for all. Miguel returned to his desk and sat down heavily. The offer of DNA testing made everything suddenly real and immediate. Within days or weeks, he could know for certain whether the King of England was his father. If the tests prove I'm his son, what would that mean for my life? That would depend largely on your choices and preferences. King Charles has made it clear that he doesn't want to disrupt your life or impose unwanted obligations. But he would like to have a relationship with you and your family, if you're interested. Miguel thought about his mother, who had carried this secret for her entire life. Elena had died never knowing whether her letter would ever reach its intended recipient, never knowing whether Miguel would ever learn the truth about his heritage. Mr. Richardson, I'd like some time to discuss this with my family before making any decisions. This affects my wife and children as much as it affects me. Of course. This is an enormous revelation, and you need time to process it. Richardson stood up and handed Miguel his business card. Take all the time you need. When you're ready to proceed, if you decide to proceed, contact me at this number. After Richardson left, Miguel sat alone in his office, staring at his mother's letter and the photographs. Everything about his life suddenly seemed different, yet nothing had actually changed. He was still the same man he had been that morning, but now he carried the possibility that he was the son of a king. He thought about calling Carmen immediately, but realized this wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. This was news that would require careful explanation, thoughtful discussion, and time for everyone to adjust to the implications. Miguel Martinez, successful architect and devoted family man, was about to discover whether he was also a prince he had never known himself to be. The letter his mother had written in desperation over 40 years ago was finally about to fulfill its purpose, but in ways Elena Martinez could never have imagined. The secret that had begun with a royal guard's promise was now in Miguel's hands, and whatever happened next would change his family's destiny forever. 6 months after David Richardson's visit to Madrid, Miguel Martinez stood in the private sitting room of Clarence House, waiting to meet the man who DNA tests had confirmed was his father. The genetic analysis had been conclusive. Miguel Martinez was indeed the biological son of King Charles III, making him a prince of the United Kingdom and his children members of the royal bloodline. The weeks following the DNA confirmation had been a whirlwind of discreet meetings, careful planning, and family adjustments. Carmen had handled the revelation with remarkable grace, though she had needed time to process the idea that she had married royalty without knowing it. Isabella and Carlos had reacted with typical teenage directness, initial disbelief, followed by excitement, followed by concern about how their lives would change. The decision to meet King Charles had not been easy. Miguel had spent countless hours discussing the implications with his family, weighing their desire for privacy against the opportunity to finally understand his heritage. In the end, curiosity and a sense of completeness had won out. Now, as he waited in the elegant room where so many important royal conversations had taken place, Miguel felt nervous in a way he hadn't experienced since his wedding day. He was about to meet his father for the first time, and that father happened to be the King of England. The door opened, and King Charles entered, followed by Prince William. Miguel's first impression was how much older Charles looked than in recent photographs. The weight of kingship seemed to have aged him considerably. But his eyes were kind and intelligent, and Miguel could see something of himself in the king's serious expression. "Miguel," Charles said warmly, extending his hand. "I can't tell you how much this means to me." Miguel shook his father's hand, struck by the surreal nature of the moment. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure what the proper protocol is for this situation." Charles smiled, the first genuine warmth Miguel had seen from him. "I think under these circumstances, we can dispense with excessive formality. You're my son, and that's more important than any protocol." Prince William stepped forward, also extending his hand. "Miguel, it's wonderful to finally meet you. I'm William, your half-brother." The word brother hit Miguel with unexpected emotional force. Throughout his life, he had been an only child, often wishing for siblings. Now he was discovering he had half-brothers and a half-sister he had never known existed. "Please, sit down," Charles said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. "We have a great deal to talk about, and I want you to feel comfortable." As they settled into their seats, Miguel found himself studying Charles's face, looking for similarities and differences. The resemblance was undeniable. They shared the same nose, the same way of holding their heads when concentrating, even similar hand gestures. "Miguel," Charles began, "before we discuss anything else, I want you to know how deeply sorry I am about your mother. Elena was a remarkable woman, and I failed her completely." Miguel had been dreading this conversation but knew it was necessary. "Your Majesty, Father, I need you to understand that my mother never spoke badly of you. She never expressed anger or resentment. I think she understood the impossible position you were both in. That makes me even more ashamed of how things ended. She deserved so much better than disappearing from the palace without explanation, never knowing whether her letters reached me." William interjected gently. "Papa, you couldn't have known what was happening. The palace system prevented any communication from getting through." Charles nodded but still looked pained. "Perhaps, but I should have fought harder to find out what happened to her. I cared for Elena deeply, and I let palace officials convince me to forget about her for the good of the monarchy." Miguel found himself feeling protective of this man he barely knew. "From what I've learned about that period, you were under enormous pressure regarding your future marriage. My mother would have understood that your duty to the crown had to come first." "Your mother was wise as well as beautiful," Charles said. "She understood my situation better than I understood it myself sometimes. During our time together, she helped me see beyond the role I was expected to play." "Can you tell me about her? About your relationship? I've wondered about this my entire life." Charles's expression grew thoughtful and warm. "Elena was unlike anyone I had ever met. She was working as a translator, but she was also studying English literature. We would have long conversations about books, about history, about philosophy. She challenged my ideas and made me think in new ways. She sounds like the mother I knew," Miguel said. "She loved books and learning. She encouraged me to question everything and think for myself. She had this wonderful laugh," Charles continued. "And she was completely unimpressed by the formal aspects of royal life. She treated me like a person, not like a title. That was incredibly rare in my experience." William watched this exchange with fascination. He was seeing his father in a completely new light, observing him discuss a relationship that had clearly been deeply meaningful despite its brevity. "How long were you together?" Miguel asked. "About 6 months, though not continuously. Our relationship had to be very discreet. We would meet when possible, usually in private areas of the palace or during my visits to various cultural events where she was working as a translator." "Did you know she was pregnant when she left England?" Charles's expression grew pained again. "No, I had no idea. If I had known, I would have. I don't know what I would have done, but I wouldn't have let her face that alone." Miguel reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph he had brought from Spain, one of Elena holding him as a baby. "She kept photographs of you, newspaper clippings, anything that would help her remember your time together. I think she never stopped loving you." Charles accepted the photograph with trembling hands, studying the image of Elena and the baby who was his son. She was so young, and so beautiful. And you were a beautiful baby. She never married, Miguel said quietly. She had opportunities, men who were interested in her, but she never committed to anyone else. I used to wonder why, and now I think I understand. The room fell silent as all three men contemplated the tragedy of Elena's situation, alone with a child, unable to contact the father, carrying her secret for over 40 years. Miguel, William said eventually, tell us about your life. What kind of man did Elena raise you to be? Miguel smiled, feeling more comfortable as the conversation turned to his own experiences. She raised me to be independent and curious. She emphasized education, hard work, and treating everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. She taught me Spanish and English, made sure I understood both cultures. She was preparing you for something, Charles observed. Whether consciously or not, she was giving you the tools you'd need if your heritage ever became known. Perhaps. She certainly emphasized that I should be proud of who I was, even if I didn't know everything about my background. William leaned forward with interest. What about your own family? Your wife and children? Miguel's face lit up when discussing his family. Carmen is wonderful. She's a teacher, very practical and down to earth. She's handled this entire revelation better than I could have hoped. And my children, Isabella is 16, very artistic and independent. Carlos is 14, loves sports and mathematics. They know about all of this? Charles asked. Yes, we told them after the DNA results were confirmed. Carmen insisted we be completely honest with them. They're excited but also nervous about what it might mean for their lives. What does it mean for your lives? William asked. How do you want this to work? Miguel had thought about this question extensively. We want to get to know you, to understand this part of our heritage. But we also want to maintain our normal life in Spain. We're not seeking titles or money or public recognition. We just want to be part of the family, if you'll have us. Charles's eyes filled with emotion. Miguel, you are my son. You and your family are already part of this family, regardless of any formal recognition. But there will need to be some formal recognition, won't there? Miguel asked. If this becomes public knowledge, there will be questions about my status, about my children's place in the succession. William nodded. We've been discussing this with constitutional experts. There are precedents for acknowledging royal children born outside of marriage, though each situation is unique. We want to handle this in whatever way is best for the monarchy and for your family, Charles said. Your comfort and privacy are as important to me as any constitutional considerations. Miguel felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance he was receiving. I need you both to understand something. I've lived 43 years without knowing about my royal heritage, and I've been happy. Whatever happens going forward, I don't want you to feel obligated to change your lives for my sake. But that's exactly what family does, William said with a smile. We change our lives for each other. That's what makes us a family rather than just a collection of individuals. Charles reached over and placed his hand on Miguel's arm. I've missed 43 years of your life, and I can never get that time back. But I refuse to miss any more of it if you're willing to let me be part of your family. Miguel felt tears threatening for the first time since entering the room. I would like that very much. Papa. The word seemed to hang in the air, marking a transition that had been 40 years in the making. Charles smiled, and Miguel could see that his father was also fighting back emotion. There's something else I want you to know, Charles said. Thomas Hartwell, the guard who kept Elena's letter for so many years, I've arranged for him to receive a special commendation for his service. Without his courage in coming forward, we might never have found each other. I'd like to meet him, Miguel said. To thank him for keeping his promise to James Morrison. I'm sure that can be arranged. Thomas specifically asked to be kept informed about how this situation developed. William stood up. Miguel, would you like to see some of the palace? I could show you around, let you get a sense of the history you're now part of. As they walked through the corridors of Clarence House, Miguel marveled at the portraits, artifacts, and rooms that represented centuries of royal history. This was his heritage too now, a legacy that connected him to generations of British monarchs. "It's overwhelming," he admitted to William as they walked. "I can imagine. But you don't have to absorb it all at once. Family heritage is something you grow into over time." When they returned to the sitting room, Charles had been joined by Camilla, who greeted Miguel with warmth and genuine interest. They discussed his family, his work, and his plans for the future. Miguel found himself feeling increasingly comfortable with these people who were now his extended family. As the afternoon drew to a close, Charles made a proposal. "Miguel, I'd like to invite you and your family to visit England properly. Not for any official function, just to spend time together as a family. Carmen and the children could see the country, we could get to know each other better, and they could meet their royal relatives." Miguel smiled. "I think they would like that very much. And, afterward," Charles continued, "we'll need to decide how to handle the public aspects of this situation. The media will eventually learn about your existence, and we want to control that revelation as much as possible." "Whatever you think is best," Miguel replied. "We trust your judgment on these matters." As Miguel prepared to leave, William handed him a photograph. "This is from our family collection, a picture of our grandfather, King George VI, at about the age you are now. I think you'll find the resemblance interesting." Miguel looked at the photograph and gasped. The resemblance to his grandfather was even stronger than his resemblance to Charles. There was no doubt he belonged to this family. "Welcome home, brother," William said, embracing Miguel warmly. Charles also embraced his son. "Elena would be so proud of the man you've become, and so happy that you finally know the truth." As Miguel left Clarence House and began his journey back to Spain, he thought about the 40-year journey that had brought him to this moment. Elena Martinez's desperate letter had finally reached its destination, Thomas Hartwell's burden had been lifted, and a family separated by circumstances beyond their control had been reunited. The secret that began with a royal guard's promise had ended with a father and son finding each other across 4 decades of separation. Miguel Martinez, architect from Madrid, was going home to tell his family that they were now officially part of the British royal family. Elena Martinez's 40-year vigil was over, and her son's new life as a member of the royal family was just beginning. The letter she had written in hope and desperation had finally delivered its message, and, with it, a love that had transcended time, distance, and the barriers of royal protocol. Thomas Hartwell's duty was complete, and the monarchy would never be quite the same again.